Now, Keefe D claims him giving this statement and closing a bush in Orlando kept 48 of his friends, his fellow Compton Crips, from getting indicted in drug cases. Just to say that a dead person killed a celebrity? I don't think so. Not likely. I think there's a lot being left out of what we know in the public. Though this could just be an example of the sometimes tremendous incompetence of the criminal justice system. Despite what you see on Law and Order and CSI, lots of things fall between the cracks. There's guilty people floating around just like there's innocent people in prison. Here's something else you should know. A lot of the information in the public that we all repeat amongst each other like it's true, well, it needs to be taken with the whole salt shaker full of salt. It's coming from Greg Kading and Reggie Wright. These are two of the key sources of information considered in the standard storyline. And before we go further, you should know this about Greg Kading and Reggie Wright. Per a federal judge, Officer Greg Kading, Vlad's favorite guy, has a history of mischaracterizing conversations in order to connect dots in criminal cases and of promising criminals favors like legal protection for themselves or loved ones in exchange for making statements favorable to his investigative agenda. Now, detectives do this all the time, so for a federal judge to actually overturn a jury's verdict, which is what he did in one of Kading's investigations, and throw out 50 guilty verdicts, including, I think, a homicide, is pretty shocking. There was this guy, George Torres. It was a big, huge case here in LA. He got convicted, and then the judge pulled him in about a week later and threw it all out because of what Kading did. And Kading explains this away as him making some mistakes when he typed up some reports. But let me tell you something. If cases got dismissed because cops made minor mistakes when they typed up reports, there'd be a hell of a lot less people in prison, a hell of a lot less. It's also interesting that Greg Kading and Reggie Wright always speak of each other so highly and pass each other the ball in this content creation business. Not saying it means anything in particular, just interesting. It's also interesting that Reggie Wright, whose father was also a Compton gang officer before he was, talks about particular gang members in Compton that he seems to have liked. Some of these people went on to have, run big drug conspiracies for a long time before the feds stepped in, and some of these guys were robbed by other groups of police officers, white and Hispanic police officers connected to the Rampart scandal, that were not Rafael Perez. They were going around and kicking in doors, including in Compton, tying up, torturing drug dealers, taking their money. It's a lot of crazy stuff going on. And most recent crazy thing is that Reggie Wright Jr. just served time in federal prison for some involvement with Grape Street Crips out of Memphis, with marijuana moving from LA to other states, and then also some money laundering. Somehow his father's bank accounts were going to get mixed up in it, so he pled guilty to keep his dad out of it. Reggie Wright Jr. grew up in Imperial Courts next door to Jordan Downs, home of the Grape Street Crips. And of course, Reggie Wright downplays this as some guys buying weed from my dispensary and mailing it places, and the feds dug me into it. But I mean, take it from me, every dispensary in LA is selling weed to people that mail it out of town. Why did his name get picked from a hat? And as a former Compton gang police officer, he ought to have been able to recognize criminal activity. And if he had gone straight and he was just in a dispensary, why would he want anything to do with some out-of-town gang members buying massive amounts of weed from him? Let's go back to the Biggie murder for a second. There's a guy named Poochie, Wardell Poochie Faust, that it's considered settled that he's the one who killed Biggie, but it's really just Greg Kading and Reggie Wright who say it was Poochie Faust for sure. Now, Wardell Poochie Faust, of course, conveniently is long dead. He was killed in 2003, shot while riding on the back of a motorcycle in Compton. Reggie Wright implies Poochie Faust killed a guy from the Nickerson Gardens named Bounty Hunter Rat. I don't know why. I mean, if he knew that, shouldn't he have helped investigate it? He was law enforcement, I don't know. Reggie Wright always implies that Poochie and Suge had a special relationship and that he was Suge's special hitman. Well, Reggie Wright was so close to Suge, he took over running death row basically when Suge went to jail. If he knows that his business partner has hitmen and is killing people, I mean, this is all very inappropriate to say the least. And as for the proof that Wardell Faust, aka Poochie, whacked Biggie for a bounty, that proof seems to all come from Greg Kading, who claims that he got this semi-mysterious woman, one of Suge Knight's many girlfriends, Teresa Swan, or she has some other names. He got her to a Starbucks and she signed a document that Poochie did it in exchange for $24,000, of which Poochie only got $11,000 and she kept $14,000. Now this woman, why is she believable? She was in trouble for running like a $10 million auto theft through fraud ring at the same time. She was involved in all types of crimes with Suge and with others. Why suddenly is she so truthful if you pressure her that oh yeah, Poochie did it? And then where is she at now? You know, why are they closing all these cases with dead people? After this woman Swan confessed to arranging the hit by taking money from Suge to Poochie Faust, once again, Greg Kading, FBI, sent her to see Suge Knight in prison, just like they sent Keefe D to see Von Zip wired for sound. But once again, Suge Knight, just like Von Zip, didn't say anything incriminating. He's always got these for certain, I know who did it, and then they go to validate it with someone wearing a wire and they can't get the principal to confess. That's the true key. That's both Poochie, the hitman supposedly on Biggie, and Von Zip, the person that facilitated Puffy, the Keefe D. They got all this evidence against them. They send them in to wear wires. They don't make a mistake and say anything incriminating. Maybe. Sounds like a lot of lukewarm factoids roamed over into a sloppy stew. And of course, what we think we know about Biggie's murder affects Pac's murder investigation, and then vice versa, because they go together like a hand in glove. Poochie Faust, perfect guy to blame the Biggie thing on and just say, oh, there it is, it's all solved, we can stop investigating it, even though some people think that perhaps Rafael Perez and some of those other Rampart cops were somehow involved, or that Death Row was involved, and it's a whole separate thing we can get into another time. Faust was in trouble since the time he was 14. He fired a shotgun at a house. In 91, he was wanted for a home invasion in San Bernardino where a guy was killed and his girlfriend was shot in the head and left to die. And then in 94, Reggie Wright, when he was still a cop, arrested Poochie and Compton for possessing a kilo of cocaine and an assault weapon. And just 2 years later, Reggie Wright is basically employing, or, you know, he's a supervisor in a company where Poochie is, you know, somewhat employed by Suge Knight. Seems, I mean, you just arrest this guy for these drug cases. He's suspect in all these murders. And then Reggie likes to tell the story about Bounty Hunter Rat pressing Suge, and then him getting killed, and that it must have been Poochie, or he implies it was Poochie. I mean, gee, these are the kind of co-workers you had at Death Row, Mr. Ex-police officer? Hey, I don't know. It's complicated. Who am I to say? Now, at Biggie's murder outside the Peterson Museum, there's a dark-colored Chevrolet Impala SS. Drove up, a black male, drew a 9mm pistol, shot and fired multiple shots into Wallace's vehicle, and pulled off. Reggie Wright is sure to tell us a story about Suge buying Poochie and Impala. I mean, did he? Is there any proof of that? I mean, a lot of people had Impalas. I mean, I was mid-20s back in the 90s. Young guys loved those cars because they were kind of regular looking, but they were like the fastest production car you could get, so they're great for getting away from the police, even though they were kind of low-key. I'm sure that was a very popular car among gang members. They could afford them in LA just like they were popular among young guys who could afford them in Detroit. I mean, Keefe D could have had a guy outside that he had do it. Could have been one of the Rampart cops who pulled an Impala out of the impound. I just find it interesting that Reggie Wright wants to be sure and tell us that Suge bought Poochie an Impala. Where's the picture of Poochie with the Impala? The bottom line is this: the easiest place to hide a needle is, of course, in a haystack full of needles, in this case, dead bodies, which is sad. There's so many murders around, Crips and Bloods in Compton and in LA, and the gangsters in New York like Jimmy Henchman, and of course, so much violence amongst certain groups of young black males across urban America. Sadly, to figuring out precisely what happened with one or two murders becomes sort of like finding a needle in a haystack when all the shooters supposedly are dead and all the witnesses are dead. And now we're forced to rely on what these two cops, one of whom worked with Death Row, have to say.